the acquisition and so forth, or the history of Avnet onto these slides, is really to identify this is where our ecosystem is at, and really it supports end-to-end, product journey for our customers. So from the engineer writing something on a cocktail napkin, through design and prototyping, all the way through large, production, supply chain, and then ultimately the services as well, associated with fulfilling your orders or programming those devices, what have you. So that's where Avnet, to the right side there, really brings solutioning into the mix as far as the Internet of Things. We do a lot with our artificial intelligence, components and devices, hardware and software, and then ultimately the final integration for the customer.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. We all know the best ideas come out on cocktail napkins, so.
It all starts there.
Do you guys mind telling me a little bit about when Avnet started the journey on creating APIs? And we'll go into a little bit of more detail for those of you who may not be familiar with an API, but when that started and how it has evolved over time, especially with the US versus moving through it. And I know, Thorsten, you could probably speak to the German and the European market, but where did that start and how has it evolved?
Well, since I'm on a bit of a roll here, I'll go first. So for the Americas specifically for API, this started about 3 years ago. We had a large customer approach us, just looking at the future as far as what technology integrations that they want to do. Primarily in the past, it's all been EDI, right? That's how you get your information, your files, your pricing, what have you. So looking forward, with that customer, we really, set forward a path on API that was, it's quick to get to market. We hooked it up to our Avnet.com database because all that information sits right there. So they can immediately, it's got a secure kind of layer to it. The customer is required to log in very much like an API would require as well. Link them up to their account, and then they're subsequently getting their price and their inventory, any product data that they want. The .com site really offers up that database or data lake of information that they can retrieve through the API services. And then, over time, we've kind of evolved the API, right? So naturally, we've all had to deal with like the China tariff and so forth as an example. And then so we made that information available through the API service as well, in parallel with it being stood up on our .com presence as well. So, Thorsten, I think we might have a bit of a different view on.
Yeah, at the end, we have the same view. Let's say we started in Europe, let's say end of last year, calendar year. We started to started the project now end of last year. So beginning of last year, we start working. End of last year, we started the project. And now we are in the progress to do the first customer UAT with API. So we are, let's say, a little bit behind of the US, but as the comment from the customer was, we are now overtaking everybody. So fortunately, we're making good progress, let's say.
Well, and I think all of it comes out of need, right? It's when your customers find a need for that, which is where you want to make sure you have that availability. So I think that's great on both sides.
Exactly.
So what are some ways that you guys are seeing people innovating using APIs? And maybe I should backtrack just for a second. For those of you who may not know, API, when we discuss it, is application program interface. And I like to just say it's two systems talking to each other, right? At the very simplest version of what it is. And it's probably more profound in our day-to-day life than most people realize. But where are you guys seeing some of the innovation happening with those APIs?
So kind of what I alluded to in the last question is where I see the innovation happening is a lot of customers are coming to us and they're either using a third-party tooling like CalcuQuote, or they're setting up their own homegrown systems. And what they're really doing is when they have that tooling in place, they need some kind of aggregation method. And so we provide them an authentication ID and password, but it's really about, they're coming to us with a list of materials, and in real time, they're retrieving the information back to their homegrown system. And to be completely honest, I know that they're doing it with our competitors as well, unfortunately. But they're becoming an aggregator of their own, and then subsequently they're making their buying decision. It's who's got stock, who's got the best price, and that's really where it's at right now. And then we'll get into more details of where we see it going, but that's currently what it's at is retrieving price and inventory is really the large factor right now.
Need of real-time data is very prevalent in this age, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially as they go through, the contract manufacturing process. They need, real-time fill of those orders to fulfill their customer demands. So that's very important.
Yeah.
Thorsten, did you have anything on that as well that you wanted to add? Kurt, cover it all.
Nothing from my side. Let's say nothing to add, honestly. Nothing to add, honestly. It's at the end price, the lead time. Yeah, you're right, and automation is key. So yeah, absolutely. Nothing really.
Yeah, great. And just so that, again, most people know who Avnet is, but maybe you guys can speak to a little bit on how they can access APIs from Avnet specifically, and what they get with that information.
Yeah. So not dissimilar, I guess, to what Europe has listed here on the screen. I mean, so we have an online form that you can access through avnet.com. It's under the Solutions tab and Site Tools. It's just a bit of a questionnaire, but it's really in close partnership. Us providing the authentication ID and passwords is in close partnership with your Avnet rep as well. One, for visibility, but two, to make sure that they're putting our best foot forward as far as returning the right information to you to fulfill your request. So the URL is down there on the lower right, and that request is, you can check the box basically to say, is it for North America, Europe, or even Asia?
Awesome. And I think in Europe, it's a little bit different right now just because you guys are developing that.
It is a little bit different. Yeah, we try to funnel that to the API Avnet representatives, so-called key account managers, so located in the office. So we would prefer that if you have contact with them already, you contact them, and then we take that internal.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So we went through a little background of Avnet. I think that helps kind of frame our conversation today. I'd like to get into more about questions on future vision of APIs and where data is moving. Because I do think we definitely hear it from our customers as well as industry leaders who are just talking about what digital transformation looks like, and that's such a buzzword right now, and we'll get into that. But how do you guys find that APIs fit into the vision of the future of the electronic supply chain?
So really, I'll like an API really to, I just lost the Zoom meeting, sorry, Caitlin.
That's right.
Okay. I'll like an API really to the eprocurement kind of solution of old, right? So, right now, like we said earlier, a lot of people are retrieving price and inventory through the tooling, but we're, from an API roadmap perspective, where we're setting up next is what other information are they going to want to retrieve? I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 3 months, it's probably a year down the road, right? But, why not get your quoting information? Why not get your forecasting information, order history? All the information that you can access by coming to avnet.com and logging in and self-serving. Why can't you retrieve that through the API services as well? So our future roadmap is really about expanding those self-service capabilities and returning that back to our partners or customers.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think we find that, especially with where the world is right now, automation is key. So having self-service options just puts you at the forefront of what you need to be doing, right? Yeah. And in regards to kind of customer relationships and customer behaviors, I think we all can agree that the EMS industry is a very relationship-built industry, which we love. What impact do you see APIs having in terms of customer behavior and order fulfillment and the entire process there?
Yeah, I mean, just picking back up on like the self-service piece, what we foresee is really, and we offer this now, right? So through the API, you can actually place an order, and it's largely transacted just through the website, and it funnels through and fires the order through. But we see that that growing in customer adoption and behavior going forward. I do want to leave Thorsten off here as well. So I think Thorsten, you had some inputs on slight differences within the European region.
Yeah, let's say we came heavily, let's say, from the EDIFACT area, Rosettanet. So API, as said, is a little bit new to us, but I would say we're making good progress here, and it's really becoming bigger and bigger. And as you said, it's around automation and really getting the right instantly price and lead time information. So that's basically what we are seeing at the moment, mainly. Yeah. The main part. sorry, the main part is we're, at least for Europe, we do not offer ordering at the moment via API. So that's where we heavily rely on EDIFACT. It's a little bit also about compliance. We have a lot of electronic services, but API for the moment is just or mainly price and lead time.
Yeah, I think we saw that too with our business and with our customers, where, you know, the quoting piece has always been, let's just get the information and gather it. And that it was initially started, and now it's moving towards, well, how much more can we do with the APIs, right? How farther can we push, which I think is really cool to see, especially within an electronics industry. So, transitioning to digital transformation, which, you know, we'll talk about and everyone's been talking about. What does that mean to each of you in a broad sense?
To me, it really means, you know, offering digital solutions to offline activities, and to put that in example form, right? So API is really replacing the having to call your sales rep to find a part, or what's the price and inventory on this part. So that's as an example, that's where I foresee API coming to the modern forefront of helping us do our digital transformation and really fulfilling a customer demand. It's not really for us to, you know, dictate how our customers need to interact with us. You know, it's up to them to tell us how they want to interact with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on that kind of same topic, you kind of touched on this a little bit, do you find that there is any type of resistance with APIs because of the relationship type bill industry? And this is a little bit off topic, but do you find any of that type of resistance to these new solutions and to the new things that are coming
out? A little bit, if I'm completely honest. You know, it's just the unknown. You know, it's a new, you know, 3-letter acronym being thrown around within the digital realm, right? So everyone's like, what is API? You know, I'm familiar with EDI from 20 years ago, and what does that mean to me as a sales rep? You know, I'd lose visibility and so on and so forth. So it's about, for me, it's really about, even though the customers are going to retrieve information through the API, it's really about still keeping the sales rep informed throughout that and giving them the comfort that the information we're providing is the exact same that they would be providing if they had called that rep directly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense.
Nothing to add, I would say, from Europe. It's a little bit, I would call it a buzzword in Europe, a little bit starting to get that. We have a lot of customers approaching us, but yeah, at the end, it's a little bit the unknown, maybe, because I would say in Europe, everybody's very much familiar with EDIFACT and yeah, but it's really lifting up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great to hear. I think when we first started, API was such a new thing that we would get that hesitation too. And I think that's a common nature thing, but API is here to stay, and another acronym to add to the electronic manufacturing industry, just because we needed one more. Well, let me actually take a moment to pause really quickly. If there are any questions, we have a really large and great audience today. If there are any questions that you guys want to see answered, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them either as we go or at the end. So again, just feel free to add those in there. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions. Okay, my next question here. How are you seeing EMS companies really use digital transformations alongside APIs to increase their competitiveness, right? And I think that's, everybody wants to increase their competitiveness. That's why we're in business. How are you seeing them do that?
So I mean, so the way I've seen it, you know, from the large, you know, contract manufacturers to the small, it doesn't really matter. It's really, you know, everyone's got a large bill of materials that they're sending to us, and like I alluded to earlier, you know, they're aggregating information, so that they're retrieving information from us in real time, and they're bringing that back, and like I said, making their buying decision or compiling a quote to ultimately give to their end customer. And so it's really about not only ease of use, but how quickly the information is available. So it's how fast they can return that quote back to their customer and equally win the award or that project as well. So that's how I'm seeing it.
Absolutely. Thorsten, are you seeing in the European region that customers are looking to use APIs to increase their competitiveness in any way?
Say it again, please. I was looking honestly about the question kept coming in.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. Let's. We'll answer this question, then we'll go back to the couple questions that have
Yep.
come in. But now that Avnet is putting a lot of emphasis on creating the API for Europe, are you hearing from customers or potential customers that they're going to use it in any unique or special ways to increase their competitiveness?
Let's say what we see is mainly in the EMS area. What we see, I assume it's regarding, let's say, as said already, automation being faster. So yeah, that's what we see there at the moment.
Makes a lot of sense. There are a couple questions coming here, and I think both of you can speak to these. First question is, what does EMI mean? I think you potentially meant, what does EDI mean? So
or
EDI,
EMS?
or EMS, I guess that's true. Could be either of them. If you want to clarify, we're happy to answer. But EDI is electronic data exchange or interchange, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's essentially just a transfer of data, I guess, if you will, another way to do that. But the next question here, which I think will help probably the rest of the audience, is what is the real difference between an API and an EDI?
So it's funny, I'm giggling a bit, as you can tell on screen, because I get this question from our sales force all the time. So EDI is great, and I don't want to be dismissive of it at all. I mean, we've been using it for, like I said, 20 years, right? And it's very fixed and rigid as far as the transmittal and the different EDI protocols, I'll call it. Mm-hmm. So for example, you have the order submittal one, you have the order response, you have invoices, part information going back and forth. They're all different protocols within EDI. I think where API gives you more flexibility, not only just with the setup piece, it's really about, all you need is an authentication ID and password. It's just like as if I give you a password to the website. We link you up to your account, and then it's up to you what information you want to retrieve. So you're not inundated with all this fixed amount of information coming through like you would get on an EDI exchange. You can specifically say, hey, I just want price, I want inventory, or I want this description. So you can be finite in what you're asking for the service to retrieve back to you. So that's where I see the biggest delta there. Ease of use and just faster.
Yeah.
For Europe, a little bit different, mainly the same, of course, but for the moment, we have a set of information we're providing via API. And I think there was a question about the ECCN number. We do provide that in Europe, or can provide that if needed. But at the moment, we have, I was just counting, 10 to 15 information we're providing via API.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point, Thorsten. The other piece that you just made me think about is, because we link API up, at least in the Americas, to the website side of the house, all the information is there. So ECCN numbers, any information out from our PIM is all readily available, A, on our site, and B, through the API services to retrieve.
Do you guys, and this is again just coming off of that question, do you guys see that API and EDI are both here to stay, or is it going to be a continuous mesh of the two, or is one going to outweigh?
Good question. Good question. Frankly, I think API is here to stay. I'm not saying, like I said, I don't think it's going to happen overnight or even a year or two down the road, just because there's been so much development and effort put into supporting EDI and even the package solutions you buy, like your Rebas and so forth. So I don't think EDI is going away anytime soon, but I see the flexibility and the ease of use moving to an API kind of model going forward, yes.
Yeah. Think for us the same. It won't go away because we have a lot of EDI connections already, EDFACT connection to be precise. We have some redundant connections, so therefore I don't think it will go away. But as Kurt said, it's much more flexible, I would say, and the set is already, let's say, there, and this can be easily linked to any system.
Yeah, I guess there's potential for the future for API to outweigh the EDI, but it's something that's, with such data that is intrinsic in everything that we do and everything you guys have set up, and probably other partners that we have that have set up, it's not something that tomorrow is going to turn off, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess to this point, I did launch a poll for how many people are using APIs in their supply chain process, and it does look like almost about 40 or so percent are not using APIs in the supply chain process, which I think is an interesting thing. And this brings me to my next question. What do you see the benefits that companies can hope to see by using APIs for supply chain processes?
So I guess I'll go first again. Sorry, Torsten.
Go ahead.
So I mean, I see it for the customer, their benefits being equal to ours, frankly. It's really about the right inventory position. The faster information is being returned, the better opportunity is to make the sale, and really just offering the best competitive price for the initial request.
Honestly, nothing to add.
Oh, sorry. I'll let Torsten.
Perfect answer.
Yeah, it's probably the same, and I think it's in general for APIs, right? You get real-time information, and that's such a critical thing, especially is real-time information. Getting a price in front of you to put a price in front of your customer means you are going to probably win that business more than your competitor, and that's frankly just the name of the game, right? We did have a question coming in, and this might be more related to an Avnet thing, is what is the advantage of using APIs versus a My Avnet account or something like that?
I think it's just how quickly you can retrieve the information. Through myavnet.com, great service, and it offers all the information you need to self-serve there. You'll be going in there to, just like you would on, say, an Amazon or something like that, go in, look at your order history, for example. In the case of an API kind of offering, you can ask for that specific information to be returned back to your internal tooling and use it however you wish, right? But a lot of times what I'm seeing is a lot of customers are going to be coming to us for the post-order interaction. So the order history, where's my order, those kind of scenarios. And why not have that information readily available? And what I mean by that is when you log into your own internal tooling, why not just, I already know it's current, retrieve my information from Avnet and tell me what my order tracking number is, and I can ping UPS and see that information. So it's just that real-time access and avoiding the additional clicks to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think alongside that too, it's something where using an API versus a single account allows you to do a lot more, quite frankly, right? And I think we see this with part numbers. An OEM is sometimes going to give an incomplete part number. And while yes, Avnet.com I'm sure has capabilities to share different options, imagine with an API pulling in all of those potential different options for that incomplete part number, and you have X amount of data right at your fingertips much more easily, right? Not that my Avnet is not a great tool, but I think there's different advantages there.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, going back to the earlier question about, I think the question was what's EDI and so forth, but also maybe it was EMS as well. So that's electronic manufacturing. So we call contract manufacturers in-house. But if you think about API and retrieving, say order history, going back to that original example, you can retrieve all that information through the API and directly attribute that to the, your customer's, manufacturing process that you're going through and be like, hey, this one part's going to take an extra week, and you can directly just, align that to that program and adjust those timelines accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. Okay, one other question before we get into kind of a different topic a little bit. This is a fun one. What's an example of a creative way you've seen, and we'll apply this to a broader term, but seen customers use an API, or a way that you've imagined a customer would use an API in a really cool way?
A cool way? That's a good question.
I know. Cool.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. So there's a couple things. So when we first set off and did this 3 years ago, it was just about bringing product information to light. And so we had a customer approach us that was also doing a lot of panel work as well about the the benefits of API. And frankly, he and his company were the ones who challenged us to say, make this thing available for me to place an order against. And so that's where we're really being led by that voice of the customer to offer up more things. As far as cool things, I guess, that we're using it for internally, if you think about our product portfolio of 7.5 million parts, it's hard to move that amount of attribute and information around. And so a lot of times we're relying on FTP and so forth. So internally, I'd say we're using it a lot to populate our data lakes so we can make the information available for others to consume via API as well. So we're not transferring large files that take 12 hours to drop onto an FTP site or something like that around. I think that's currently the cool thing that we're working on.
For me, a cool use case would be, let's say, as I said, I'm coming from asset. I started a career in purchasing. So having, using CalcuQuote or other competitors, having an API connection to different distributors, you upload a BOM and you see instantly different prices. So that would be for asset, I would say, a perfect match for API.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from our perspective too, as opposed to just like a connection with a supplier or a distributor, we see it on a large spectrum of, I'm going to tell my ERP system to send my customer information to my quoting tool. And then when I win that business, I'm going to tell it to send it back to my ERP system to then create my MRP demand and load it into my tool, right? So there's so many different ways. And we have a number of customers who use our APIs alongside their APIs with their ERP systems and other internal tools to create this big supply chain process with APIs that takes away so much automation and redundant data where human entry can, quite frankly, mess up. So it's a really interesting thing. There are a couple questions, but I did want to get into one more of my questions and then we'll go into the rest of the Q&A. So keep putting in your questions there because I think they've been great. But one thing I really want to talk about, because I do think it's prevalent to what's going on in the world, is the fact that digital transformation has been a large buzzword, and it has continued to be a buzzword for some time. Do you see that trending positive?
Yeah, I think for us, just speaking candidly, I mean, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention COVID-19 in this climate, right? So I think what we've seen is, we alluded to it earlier, where there's still a large dependency in our industry, at least, to work with the sales rep. But I think what we've seen is that we have an evolution in our existing customer base, and then you also have the new engineers coming out of university and everything else, and they frankly don't want to talk to anybody. So I think that we've seen a lot of migration to digital offerings, and whether that's the .com presence or it's an API kind of solution to support their needs, that's where I really see the customers, like I said earlier, evolving, I guess, to meet with us, digitally. But equally, we in this climate, we have a lot of manufacturers shutting down, and so a lot of customers are on the lookout for alternative parts to fulfill their needs as well, because a lot of our customers aren't slowing down. They've actually increased their own manufacturing, to support the pandemic as well with test devices and so on and so forth. So we still have to fulfill those components inside those. So they're just looking for alternative means in which to acquire the information. So, Torsten, I think your view on Europe?
Nothing to add a lot, I would say. As said, we're coming from the EDIFACT area. So yeah. Let's say what I learned with API, you get instant information. That I would say, again, coming from asset, would help you a lot. And as Kurt said, we have a lot of new people, young people, maybe don't want to talk to anybody anymore. And it's really just on a mouse click, you have all information a distributor can provide in an easy way. And in my understanding, it wasn't so easy with EDIFACT. As I'm quoting always EDIFACT, I know, but with API, it's much more on the fingertip available in information. That's, I think, people like.
Great. Well, I appreciate all of our conversation. We have some good questions coming in, so I think we're going to start like the official Q&A section of this, which great questions, so I appreciate it from everybody. So question here, and I might need somebody to clarify on it, or if we can kind of figure out what the meaning is. How could manufacturer project quoting pricing be handled via API? So I'm not sure I fully understand that.
I can take a shot at it, but if I haven't answered it correctly, then obviously I think put into the Q&A chat window, I can add more. So like we kind of set off, I mean, a lot of our customers, I'd say 90% of them are, well, even more, are just using this for price and inventory right now. And that's really used internally on their side to populate quotes for their own customers. So what we're seeing is, or the future, I guess, of API is really to extract that information from us. So we did a quote for an entire bill of materials, or your forecast and where you might have constraints. All that information should be readily available through the API services as well.
Great. Yeah, and if that didn't answer the question, feel free to put it in there. Another question here, have you guys ever considered using webhooks to send notifications to customers, such as advanced shipment notifications? And maybe if we have a simple description for what a webhook is for those who may not know.
The answer is yes, and that's really coming with our evolution of the roadmap for API, right? So as soon as we start offering up order history, for example, then we'll have the information available to give or provide those advanced ship notifications back to the customer, or any changes within their notifications as well, right? So I got one today from Amazon where my order is going to be delayed. Why not just automatically send that information over to the customer? And you can do that twofold. One's the traditional email, and that's completely appropriate. The other one, why not just update their systems as well? So it really becomes a back and forth interaction to accept those kind of updates directly into their systems as well. So it's a good partnership.
For Europe, I can mention today not. We use dispatch advice via EDIFACT. So at the moment, no, a simple no.
Sure. What's going to happen in the future, right? Next question here, how, and maybe you don't, but is there any differentiation between a part search API and a quote via API?
Yeah, but there's two different things, right? So ultimately the information retrieved is going to be the same. So I would say you have two different areas. You have one, you're just performing a part search or something of that nature, and whether it's a part or it's a broad category, could bring you back multiple results. Through an API service, you're generally looking for a very specific part. And so you're not going to end up doing a query that for like a capacitor or something like that that's going to return 200,000 results to you. So you're usually already have a bill of materials or something in play, or at least some very granular description of the part that you're looking to retrieve that through the API service. So you're only getting one or two results at most.
I'm assuming that's the same for across the board with those APIs for all locations. So.
Yeah.
This is a good one, and I think it's potentially going to be different based on regions. And I think, Kurt, we've actually had this conversation yesterday. Avnet provide any tariff indications through the API, and that's I'll say a very hot topic, because are they here to stay or are they leaving? And nobody really knows that. That's okay. But yeah, I'll let you guys kind of answer that one.
So going back to what information we offer through the API, and I alluded to it a bit earlier with the China tariff, but I mean, we don't know how it's going to evolve, right? So China tariff was a big one for a while there, but there's other tariffs that even happen now, and who knows what the future holds, right? So, but what we do on our side is we know that items are coming out of a certain region or something like that and may, and I'll put that in air quotes, may incur a tariff charge, and so we can return that information through the API services. And really, what it comes down to is what's the country of origin and where you're shipping it to. And then so with that information in hand, we can directly say this item may incur a tariff charge. And the reason I keep saying may is, if you think about the fulfillment process, you have the warehouse associate going to a bay to actually pick up the part. In some cases, that bay may hold the exact same part, but manufactured in different areas or different regions. So that's why the may comes into play, because until that part is physically picked, you can't really charge a customer for the tariff charge associated to that. So we just kind of let you know up front, it may be assessed a tariff charge, so they can kind of work that into their calculations.
Yeah, for us the same. We provide that information. We provide for the moment only where we ship from different warehouses in Europe. No country of origin for the moment, but yeah, tariff numbers we do provide.
Mm-hmm. And on that, this wasn't a question, but kind of something that came to my mind. Is there a difference? So when somebody is quoting a part and there's that may a tariff applied, what's the differentiation when they try to purchase that via API? Do they see that cost come in when that purchase is placed, or is it when obviously they're going to receive that invoice because that's when they're going to pick it off the shelf?
Yeah, it really is. So when they go to place an order, so the API service just simply says basically yes or no, that it may incur a tariff charge. When they actually go to place the order, then we get a little more granular because we can tell you what's left in that home within the warehouse, but it's still a bit of an estimation, and it really comes down to the final invoice because that's the point of that's the point of the end, right? So we know exactly what we picked, where the goods were manufactured, and if the customer should be charged the tariff.
Awesome. A few more questions here. For a company implementing the Avnet API, whether that is through a third-party tool or through their own tool, what is the typical implementation? Wow, it's hard for me to say this morning. What is the typical timeline for that implementation, and are there any common places where people will get stuck?
No, it's a good question. So right now, I'll be completely honest, it takes us about 2 weeks to get your login credentials. Something that we take personally on our side is to do that faster. We should be able to get your credentials within a couple of days. So we're working on that now, and by fall we'll be able to quickly turn that around for you. So yeah, that's really the big component on our side.
And I'm assuming there's going to
yeah, for Europe. Just a quick comment for Europe. We try to work through our salespeople, so therefore it is a little bit of talking, let's say. So it's not, let's say, an automated process. And we are using for the moment only a third-party provider where we're connected to with API, and the direct API will follow up later, and therefore it may use the same time as Kurt said, so around 2 weeks, I would say.
Yeah, that's been my question. Great. Awesome. Next one here, and I think this is kind of an interesting one, and maybe relates more to how you guys are seeing your business evolve. But how does using an API impact marketing activities? So if a user has less contact with the web page and the marketing actions for Avnet, is that decreasing what you guys do on the marketing side?
I think it's like anything as far as evolution, right? So customers aren't going to be coming to the website anymore. Not now, down in the future, right? So they're going to retrieve this information through an API service. So the evolution is really on the marketing side to make sure that the email communications, as an example, or whatever kind of SEO or PPC activities that we embark on, that they're very specific and personalized and to the right audience. Because like I said, through the API service, it's really agnostic of any human interaction. So they're not seeing a fancy homepage or the latest marketing tile. So marketing evolves a bit with API, so we can still touch those customers in the right ways.
I'm going to skip over this support question just because I think we'll finish that out in our closing thoughts. But I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So when a customer, so you get a price from an Avnet API, or let's make it more general, from any API, and that customer comes back and they win that order, and you follow that up with a purchase order through the API, how do you confirm the price came from the API?
Yeah, I mean, so the API is real-time price call, right? And so there could be some fluctuations. Prices don't change that much because the costs aren't changing that much within the pool of parts that we physically have on the shelf. So really, once the order is fired through, it just goes through the normal kind of checks and balances to make sure we're not losing our shirts, I guess, on the order because it fluctuated that much. But usually these are API requests, and the subsequent orders are fairly quick turn within a week or 2. So the fluctuation on price just really isn't there.
And I guess my follow-up to that is, and this might just be an informational piece, and Avnet does this as well as a multiple of other suppliers and distributors, but you guys actually link to a customer's account so that if I'm looking for part number 123, and it's going to say that's Caitlin's part price, right?
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
information as well, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the big piece. I mean, linking it up to an account is carries its own benefits. It's firstly, yes, to your point, it's about price, making sure that the same price we're going to offer through the API or even on the website is the same one that the sales rep would be offering to the customer had they rang up. And then equally, there's different inventory values that come along with that as well, not just what we have on the shelf for general audience. Because customers do have, ring-fenced inventory sitting in our warehouse that only they have access to, so they can retrieve that through the API as well.
I guess continued on that, and this is always a question that we get too, so I'm glad somebody asked it because I didn't think of it. How do you guys handle registered pricing? So if I, as ABC Manufacturing, have a customer who's building something for a customer, right? That customer has some type of registered pricing with potentially Avnet or others. How do you handle that through an API type model?
So that's our first price point that we go after, right? So if you think about pricing being in almost like a sequential order, the first bucket is what we call award pricing or the registration pricing, and that gets loaded into our back office, and that's the first price that's retrieved associated to that account number. Beyond that, then you get into just negotiated discount pricing against all the other parts that don't have an award or don't carry an award or registration. And lastly, if it doesn't have that kind of negotiated price, then we get into our competitive price engine that kind of fills in everything else.
And I'm assuming that's how it's going to work on the European side as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, I think we've had some really great questions. We're about wrapping up some of our time here. So any closing thoughts, anything you guys want to leave with the customers regarding pointers on how they can learn more, how they can utilize APIs in their supply chain processes moving forward?
Yeah. So I guess my quick closing thought would be, and we get this question a lot too, is where do you start with this, right? It's, so you got to think about your own in-house kind of tooling, right? So do you have a tool in which you can retrieve this information from us and use it accordingly within your organization? So I'd say just sit down, jot down, okay, do you have an existing tool or not? It's kind of the first thing. And then what information is it that you're looking to retrieve? Like what's your end goal? Is it just to retrieve price and inventory so you can get a quote back, or are you looking at those kind of self-service features of forecasting and so forth that you want to retrieve through the tool? And it should be a bit of a roadmap for evolution there. So we can support you now, obviously. So you can just come to avnet.com, fill out the questionnaire, or if you want any help and guidance as far as how to start this whole process, we're here as well. So that where you fill out the questionnaire is a bit of a landing page that gives you a bit of a tutorial as well.
Great. And Thorsten, I'm assuming from the European side, it's they can learn more either talking to their rep. Is it something that you guys are working through internally on an educational thing for the sales rep team to understand the APIs?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do right now. I would agree to Kurt. For the moment, we are, as I said, offering that service to a third-party provider. So for us, it would mean try to understand, do you have that connection already to that third-party provider? So that's what we're linking to. If not, the next stage would be for us, it's a stage approach to offer a direct API, and then we could do something together, let's say later this year, this current year.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Well, I think that's kind of everything. And if there are any other questions that we didn't get to, or you'd like to have other questions answered, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to facilitate that. But I appreciate everyone coming. Thorsten and Kurt, thank you so much for being here. Truly appreciate it. I think awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Definitely keep a lookout for our webinar that's going to come up in July. We'll be doing a similar one as a part of the series. And again, if there's any questions regarding APIs, specifically Avnet API, happy to facilitate that. And if you have any questions about CalcuQuote, happy to have that conversation as well. And have a great rest of the week and a weekend. All right.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.